everybody. This is Pastor Sam Rambo. I know I haven't done one of these in a long time, but we're going to do a Sunday review. So we're going to be going through this today. So we just got done with our 16-part series, the 16 Fundamental Truths of the Assemblies of God, and it was a pretty good thing for our church just to kind of get to see where we are as a church. What do we believe? What do we believe as a denomination? Technically, we're not a denomination. We are a fellowship, which just means that each church is more accountable for itself rather than having a bigger denomination over top. It's more like churches getting together and deciding what they believe and deciding to help each other out and be a community rather than a bunch of separate churches. And again, it's really good for any body of people to kind of sit down and discuss what do we want, what do we believe, what do we think about these things. Because you have to think about it. With every government that's ever existed, they have to sit down and say, okay, what do we want the most? What is the most important to us as a government? The same thing with denomination. What do we believe? Because you start to find yourself when you believe certain things that you start to be grouped together with certain people. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be at times, but for the most part, that's how we live as people. It's really hard for you to really be in community with people that you have no connection to, which you have connection to everybody at some level. But for the most part, you really, you kind of really stay in a lane of people, if that makes sense. So we are starting a new series called The Pursuit of Happiness. This is kind of in line with the 4th of July in talking about the United States government, and one of the biggest parts of the Constitution is those three things that we're supposed to be guaranteed: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So when we're thinking about America, those are some things that we need to think about. And the reason why we came to this conclusion of wanting to do a series on the pursuit of happiness is because whenever I think of summer, I usually think of happiness. You know, I think of happy times. It's really nice to be able to wake up and look outside and it be sunny. It's really nice when you're walking outside and you get to feel that nice, warm summer breeze. You're just getting out of winter. There's no more snow on the ground, especially for us in the north. For the people in the south, you might not experience that as much. But up in the north, we have snow. It gets really cold. Things shut down for a long time. There's not a lot of sports that you can play outdoors. It's just kind of like this dreary mode. And then when you get to spring, there's lots of rain. There's lots of uncertainty what the days will bring. You don't know if it's going to be really cold or really hot. Like in this past April, we were under 30 degrees a few times, and it was just like really uncertain. What's spring going to bring? What is it going to do? So whenever I think of summertime, I think of happiness. Especially as a kid. When you're a kid in the summer, you get to let go of that stress that comes with school, and you get to get this feeling of new opportunity, of enthusiasm, and it's a time where you get to hang out with your friends that you made at school, or maybe outside of school. You get to hang out with your friends and do things that aren't school related. It's kind of nice. So this is why we kind of got into the series of The Pursuit of Happiness. And it's really important for us to kind of understand, what does the scriptures say about happiness? What does God say about happiness? What is happiness for? And it's really hard because personal happiness is something that's really huge in our culture. And, you might think that this is like every culture liked happiness, right? Every culture wanted everybody to be happy. And that's not always true. You look in the medieval era, there was this big push of chastity, this big push of sacrifice, this big push of you need to live poor. This is something that was really big in, the more mainline churches. Well, maybe not more mainline churches. This was something that was really popular in the super holiness churches. They said you need to be unhappy in order to be holy. Holiness is unhappiness. Holiness is to be rid of all pleasures. And it's really interesting. So Yeah, personal happiness isn't something that was big in every culture and every time, but our culture today really pitches how many ways that we need to be happy. Some of these get happy schemes leave us empty and dry because if you think about it, most organizations they try to key off the fact that we're unhappy or they try to prove that you're unhappy and then give you a product that's like, hey, this is going to solve your unhappiness. This is something that's really popular in our culture. You can look at it from any ad that you see on TV. They'll say, hey, you're unhappy, and I'll prove it to you because you don't have this product. But if you get this product, you can now be happy. And the thing is, that doesn't last very long because there's always going to be another product. So even if you are susceptible to some of those schemes, they're always going to leave you high and dry because it's like, hey, there's going to be new products that you don't have. And there's another thing of other people drive a specific agenda when they start talking about happiness. They will say, hey, in order to be happy, you have to live the way that you want to live, right? Inside of you, you already know what it's like to be happy. You know what you need to do to be happy. There's an internal happiness that's inside of you that you need to bring out. There's a couple problems with this. Number one is that something that might make you feel happy could take away happiness from somebody else. And the classic example is if it makes you happy, okay, if you feel like in order to be happy, you need to be rich, you say at whatever cost to get rich, that's going to make me happy. So if you start stealing from people, you say, hey, this is what makes me happy. But the thing is you're taking happiness away from somebody else. So your happiness supersedes other people's happiness. So that's not an objective thing. That's a subjective thing, which makes it really hard to make that a standard for everybody. Say, if everybody can live to a subjective lifestyle, that means that there's a lot of people that are going to have a worse lifestyle because of the people taking advantage of them. Another thing is that sometimes we will do things that make us think that we're happy that will actually damage ourselves. So it can either damage other people or damage ourselves. So if you look at it, if you eat too much sugar, it's going to destroy your body, right? If you've ever had too much sugar at one time, it's like, man, it hurts my teeth. And other times, and it will destroy your liver. It'll make your heart beat way too fast. Your brain will be going crazy because of the sugar, because it's a drug like everything else. And it's terrible for your body weight. It's terrible for your mental development. It's terrible for everything. So sometimes these things that we think, hey, there's something on the inside of me that makes me want to feel happy, we look to some of these things and they can either hurt us or other people. And this is really common. So happiness isn't something that can come from on the inside of us. It has to be an external source to make us happy. Something that needs to tie all of this in is to kind of define what does happiness actually mean. Happiness is the general enjoyment and appreciation for the life we are living. Happiness can be an internal feeling over periods of time, or it can be an external response to stimulation. So it's either momentary or it's a state of feeling. There's a deep layer within happiness that I would call contentment, just like this general acceptance of the life around you. And some people think contentment's a bad thing. That's complacent. Contentment is a very beautiful thing where nothing needs to change in order to change how you feel because you're content. Content is this status that you gain from just accepting everything and being willing to live with it. The happiness that the world pitches to us actually is just a hedonistic pursuit of self-indulgence. Happiness and hedonism are not the same because hedonism is basically the worshiping of the self. All morality is based upon the pursuit of pleasure, and typically it's at any cost. When you talk to hedonists or you talk about hedonism, there's not like this end. There's no lines where you can cross. It's like, oh, well, that would cross a line. Because the only line that can be crossed is unhappiness. So if you are not experiencing pleasure, you've crossed the line, if that makes sense. So the only immoral thing that you can do is not to have pleasure. So no matter what it takes, you need pleasure. That's what hedonism is, and that's what the world kind of pitches. Like, Live how you think you want to live, because that'll give you pleasure. Eat whatever you want. That'll give you pleasure. Act however you want. That'll give you pleasure. So, quoting the Handbook of Christian Apologetics, the shallow meaning of happiness, which is a modern meaning, is first of all subjective. Happiness, in this sense, is a feeling. If you feel happy, you are happy. Second, this happiness is only a present, temporary phenomenon. Feelings come and go, and so does the feeling of happiness. Third, this happiness is largely a matter of hap, that is, the chance or fortune. It is good luck. It is not under our control. Finally, its source is external. It consists in things like winning the lottery or the Super Bowl, or bodily pleasures or prestige or help. It is money, sex, and power. Never poverty, never chastity, and never obedience. So this is the shallow meaning of happiness, like we talked about, like the hedonistic part. The older, deeper meaning of happiness is evident in the Greek word eudaimonia. This is, first of all, an objective state, not a subjective feeling. It's not true that if you only feel happy, you are happy. A grown man sitting in the bathtub all day playing with his rubber ducky may be contentment, but he is not happy. A Nero gloating over the Christians he killed may be pleased, but he is not happy. Happiness is to the soul what health is to the body. You can feel healthy without being healthy, and you can feel happy without truly being happy. You can also be happy without feeling happy. As Job, learning wisdom through suffering, Jesus saying, "Blessed, objectively happy, are those who mourn, feeling subjectively unhappy." Matthew 5:4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Assume such a distinction. So something I want to draw out from that is happiness is to the soul what health is to the body. You can feel healthy without being healthy, and you can feel happy without being happy, just the same way as you can actually be happy without feeling happy. Something that might come as a shock to us is that God actually wants us to be happy. And that it's kind of sad that should be a shock to us, because God made us to be happy. There's something inside of us that wants to be happy. That's the whole point of the pursuing happiness thing. So where does that happiness ultimately come from? So an illustration of God wanting us to be happy is the story of Brother Lawrence. He was a lowly, unlearned man who didn't know very much. He was a former soldier, but he was super clumsy, so he got sent out to a monastery. And, he was a former soldier, and then he got saved, so then he thought, hey, I should go to a monastery to atone for my sins, because I think I'm clumsy, and I think I need to not be clumsy. So he was admitted into a monastery to try to cure himself of clumsiness, because he felt like clumsiness was a sin, which is something that was very prominent during that day. And a part of his new assignment, he believed that in order to get closer to God, he needed to be stripped of his life of meaning, and he needed to be stripped of all of his pleasure. So Brother Lawrence believed that in himself he should not have any pleasure, because if he's experiencing pleasure, he's not being with God. Remember that holiness is unhappiness. To be holy is to be miserable. That's the belief. But something that was really disappointing for him is that when he was spent more time with God, God gave him nothing but happiness and satisfaction. So he went in thinking, I need to become unhappy. And then what he came out with was being overjoyed. When he wanted to be stripped of pleasure, God gave him complete satisfaction. Because this is God's plan. God is happiness. God is what happiness comes from. Everything good in the world comes from God. Anything happy or anything that can make us happy ultimately comes from God. These good feelings of pleasure come from God. And it's only through sin that those pleasures are manipulated to leave us empty. And a part of that is it's like a battery getting taken away from the source where it gets filled up from. That battery will last for a moment, but it's not going to be there forever. It needs that constant source of power. God is that constant source of happiness for us. The other things can make us happy. Other things are manipulated, so we feel the good things that God had in it, but then we get taken away because the sin has perverted it. So a good thing, or like a good example is back to that sugar argument. So things that taste good, that's ultimately something that comes from God, but things that have bad effects on our body is something from sin, right? Because our bodies are cursed, that means like bad things are going to happen in our stomach when we eat things. So if you eat too much of something, that's a part of that sin, that residual effect of sin on you, if that makes sense. Okay. So thinking about everything good coming from the Lord, happiness is actually something that comes from the Lord. In Psalm 144:15 says, "Happy is that people whose God is the Lord." And quotation here by David Osberger. He says, "Happiness is living by inner purpose, not by outer pleasures. Happiness is a happening with God." And then David Osberger also said, happy persons seldomly think of happiness. They are too busy losing themselves in their lives in the meaningful sacrifices of service. So he's saying happy people don't care about happiness because they're too busy losing their lives in the meaningful service and services. And also saying like happiness is living by inner purpose. It's not by outer pleasures. So the things that truly make you happy is by serving, and it's only something that you can do when you're serving God. And St. Augustine says, happiness consists in the attainment of our desires and in our having only right desires. So happiness is when we attain our desires. And true happiness only comes when we have the right desires and we attain those right desires. So some scriptures to back this up really quick. It comes from James. James was the brother of Jesus, and he was one of the most intense and rigid law preachers in all of Scripture. And he says in James chapter 5, verse 13, "Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise." He doesn't say, "Is anyone happy? Shame on you. You shouldn't be happy." So some of our conclusions that we should gain from this talk is we need happiness to have a fulfillment in our lives, and God is our full source of happiness. So within God, we can have our full source of happiness. I mean, if you can imagine a world, okay, happiness is like color to a canvas. So if you're going to live your life in a total gray fashion, it's going to be terrible. Being unhappy is the worst feeling you can ever have, because it's this something, a part of yourself is missing, first of all. Second of all, there is no enjoyment of the world around you. And actually, unhappiness is ungodly, because unhappiness means that you're not experiencing the happiness that God has for you. And that's not talking about clinical depression. That's not talking about clinical anxiety or anything like that. It's talking about like this general sense of happiness. When we say like it's ungodly, that means it's something that doesn't honor God. Whether that is via sin that you're committing, actively not being happy, or whether that's the effects from sin, meaning like that part. Okay. All pain and all bad things in the world are a direct result of sin. So whether your depression is you actively sinning or just the effects that sin have already played. So if there's something wrong in your mind, that is an ultimate effect of the sin that happened with Adam and Eve. So not being happy is not God honoring and is also not healthy for us. If we're not happy, we won't do things well, we won't be passionate about things, and we won't be able to connect with people very well, because if we're not being happy, it's hard for us to connect to other people. So our conclusions is we need to be happy to fulfill our lives, and God is our full source of happiness. Well, thank you all so much for hopping on to our long-awaited episode of Sunday Review. It's been a couple life updates for me. I'm now married, which I wasn't the last time we did one of these. I have a baby coming in November, which is another thing that's incredible. We get to find out what gender it is in a couple weeks, and we'll probably announce it. I don't know on here, but if you know us really well, you'll probably hear that. But anyways, thank you so much for hopping on and watching this video. I know it's been a while. I apologize, but I'm excited to start doing it again. I have a new office, so I have new space to do it in, and it just feels better and feels nicer. Well, thank you all so much for hopping on. Have a nice night or day or whenever you're watching this. All right, bye-bye.